You're listening to P&P Pals, Tabletop Role-playing Radio Theatre. While P&P Pals, the show we make, must necessarily lag behind P&P Pals, the game we play, I'm excited to report that we finally got to a couple of army-scale battles. In today's segment, The Battle Begins, I'm going to talk about our experience with the rules we've been using. Before we start, you might consider looking over the 5e Unearthed Arcana when Armies Clash. That's what we've been playing around with. There's another UA concerning large-scale battles entitled Mass Combat, but we're not interested in battles of that scale, or at that level of abstraction. Looking back over it, I'm wondering if it's meant as a conceptual successor to When Armies Clash. It's a little disconcerting, using rules the official designers might have already written off entirely. As of this recording, When Armies Clash is still available from the D&D site. We'll try to put a link in the description. Failing that, or failing your willingness to peruse a PDF, here are some of the highlights of the system as written. The majority of creatures are bundled into groups of 10, known as stands. Each of the 10 must be statistically identical. Some especially powerful creatures can take to the field alone. They're called solos. Compared to 5e's typical party-scale combat, a round of battle is 10 times longer, at a minute. A standard square of movement is larger, at 20 feet to a side. To ease play, movement must be orthogonal, and squares touching diagonally aren't considered to be adjacent to one another. And now, a part of the system that I find especially interesting. A stand of creatures uses the same stat block that a single creature would. I quite like the idea here, this kind of exponential notation. Since most creatures are going to be running around in packs of 10, this keeps the numbers manageable. It allows the design to focus on altering logistical mechanisms, like changes to movement and the addition of low morale as a kind of failure state. That said, things become a little fuzzy once you include creatures of gargantuan size, which take up an enormous 80 by 80 foot area. They're always designated as solos, which means that anytime they fight a creature of a smaller size class, they'll be outnumbered 10 to 1 at a minimum. We haven't had a reason to test how this works out yet, but I expect some weirdness when we do. I think this rule relies on a creature's staying power living up to the word gargantuan. Basically, it can't just be a big monster. It needs to be a capable, city-stomping kaiju, or it's going to get swamped by several dozen buff monster hunters. The changes to movement make for an interesting abstraction. To determine how many map squares a stand or solo can move in a round, you divide their usual speed by 5, which, if you do some quick mental math, doesn't match any dang thing. An example. A Wood Elf Scout can usually move 35 feet without dashing. Over a minute, that's 10 rounds in standard play, they should be able to cover 350 feet. A stand of Wood Elf Scouts, though, they move 7 tactical squares over the same period of time. 7 times 20 is, I'd rather not embarrass myself here, so I'm triple checking, yes. 7 times 20 is significantly less than 350. Maybe Mr. Merle slipped up on the math here, but I'm pretty sure it's more considered than that. I think it's meant to account for small-scale instances of difficult terrain, the delays incurred when a group moves with a battle-ready mentality, and the logistical challenge of moving as part of a larger unit. Which brings me to the next point. Units. Stands can be collected into groups called units. Describing their functions and potential in detail would absolutely devour the time I have left for this segment. Suffice it to say, there are 2 kinds: loosely arrayed skirmishers and rigidly organized regiments. Skirmishers gain a number of bonuses related to dexterity and mobility. The highlight for me personally is their ability to use any remaining movement after performing an action. Regiments receive fewer obvious bonuses and even some penalties, such as obstructing allied movement. In exchange, they're granted the perhaps somewhat overwrought configure action, which allows a unit to cut its mobility for a bonus to either attack rolls or armor class. In my admittedly limited play experience, I found skirmishers to be more broadly useful, and feel that regiments lack their obvious purpose and power. I've made some use of the advantage-granting aid configuration, but was underwhelmed by defend. It provides only a modest +2 bonus to AC, and the price is high. Movement is halved, and the unit loses the attack action. But maybe that's okay? Advantage, functionally speaking, is a +3 bonus to a roll with the added benefit of a higher than usual crit chance. Setting an aided regiment against a defending one will eventually see those defenders fall unless some outside force intervenes. But, again, maybe that's okay. Maybe that's by design. I can only imagine that the idea here was to drive the game toward a resolved conflict. It might not have been clear so far, so I should explain. These rules are playtest material. Official playtest material, but still experimental. Audette and I have run an encounter or two with the rules exactly as written, in an environment where we have little investment. The Cinder Strand. Yes, rather than throwing Retribution and Anise into a dark pool of unexplored mechanisms, we've been testing them on an unsuspecting, war-torn countryside, dispassionately pitting an invading army against the local militias and under-equipped town guards. We've done this to find any changes we might want to introduce, and have essentially been co-DMing this part. Audette will ask,
how many soldiers would you reasonably find in a town this big?
And I'll say, I'd set the number of soldiers you want to test, then base the size of the town on that.
And now, this happy little town is a nice big city.
Of all the additions and changes we've considered, adding some kind of resilience against critical hits when in defense configuration is the one I come back to most often. That, and dividing the skirmisher designation into 2 distinct roles, because right now it feels like most ranged units and cavalry are better served by it, and that might be a sign that it's a little too versatile, but I digress. I've been mulling it over on my own for a while, so what I'm about to say is going to be news to Audette, too. I don't think tweaking the core rules is the answer. Instead, I think that features specific to a creature type might be a better addition. For example, imagine a stand comprised of specially trained war mages. They have a feature that, when using the defense configuration, they gain the bonus to AC and have advantage on saving throws against magic. I mean, this kind of thing is implicit in the system already. A stand of dwarves should benefit from dwarven resilience against poison, right? Right. But that's very general. I think creatures trained for this scale of conflict should have additional features tailored to the mechanics introduced by this subsystem. It'd be pretty easy to add a bonus to an existing creature template, change the name, and boom. Mass combat veterans. I've got a template for an NPC knight here. If I add, when this creature reduces a stand or solo to 0 hit points with a melee weapon, it can immediately use the retreat action, change the name to Light Cavalier, and that addresses something I'd like to see in this scale of combat without rooting around in its guts. If any of those guts are a problem, it's what's required pre-game. I think P&P Pals being a 2-player game puts us in a fairly unique position to use these rules as written because, oh boy, we both have digital spreadsheets 3 tabs deep to keep track of everything. It's pretty late in the segment, but let me try to describe the flow. The first tab lays out the name and number of creatures available to a fighting force. It has a field for the designated stands as well. The second tab has a numerical ID for each stand, the creature type that composes them, their current status, and a wholly frivolous field for a name. Of the stands we've fielded so far, my favorites are the 14th Timber Spears and the Burly Strikers. This all feels like the kind of thing that might get cut later. I can see a future where each stand could function as a kind of character, with 10 top-level super HP restored by a general pool of trainees. It's also important to note that this is a player-centric system that Audette will mostly get to ignore once testing is done. The final tab is where all the action happens. The bone-thrilling, mind-chilling, flamethrower razor action. It has an alphabetical unit ID, distinct from the numerical stand IDs, a drop-down for unit type, another drop-down for regiment config, if applicable, a list of composited stands, a field for any casualties, a drop-down for morale, then a few more fields for wisdom bonus, initiative bonus, attached solos and commanders, and finally one more for a unit name, Everlasting Glory to the Gilded Wing. Someone else might look at that and say, how many drop-down boxes does this spreadsheet have? It's too many drop-down boxes. And to that I say, nah man, that's what makes it good. I've got to have this much drop down to get up. You know what I'm saying?
No, I don't know what you're saying. You're terrible.
What? It's perfectly natural.
You stop that. You get out.
Physiological response.
Out. Get End the episode right
to
now.
Overexposure.
You're banished.
To data entry. What? That's it for today, and I didn't even get to talk about 2/3 of this document. Maybe I'll come back to it later. I have words about the casualty system and victory points, mostly nice ones even. If you have any questions, find our social media below, or leave a comment. The music for our intro was composed by Walker Williams. We have links to him and his work in the description. This show is produced by Precarious at best, and heard by you. See you around, curious traveler.